And live streams started.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. Hello, everyone. It's your June 12th Resource Planning Advisory Group meeting. We'll get started in about 4 or 5 minutes. Welcome, Joel. How are you?
I'm doing well, Sophie. How are you doing?
I'm good. Have you enjoyed what I'm now considering the start of summer?
Uh, yeah, so far so good. Enjoying the nice weather for sure.
Yeah. I always find it very confusing that solstice is the start of summer because to me, I'm like, you're already like cooking by the time it's June 21st or whatever it is. But I suppose I'll follow the laws of our atmosphere or whatever. Okay. Waiting for some other RPAG members to trickle in. We know that Aliza and Dan can't be here, but I haven't heard about anyone else being unavailable. So we should have a nice group. Welcome, welcome everyone to anyone who's streaming on YouTube. We'll get started in a few minutes. Hi there, Fred. Good morning. So we have Joel with the UTC, Fred with NWEC, and others will surely trickle in. Welcome everyone to the RPAG meeting. We're going to let RPAG members have a few more minutes to join. Good morning, Katie. How are you?
Morning, how are you doing? I'm good.
Good. Hi there, Kate. Looks like Jim is slowly connecting to audio there. Good morning, Jim. How are you?
Well, how are you, Sophie?
Good. Has it started getting into the 90s yet in Colorado, or have you maintained some semblance of cool?
We had some heat last week, but it's cooled off a bit this week.
Good. At least when it's night in Colorado, it's always cool. You know, it's rarely, at least when I lived there, did I feel like the nights maintain that sort of stickiness. Who knows? Let's see. We have Stefan here. Welcome, Stefan. Good to see you.
Hey there. Thanks, Sophie. Good to see you too.
Just updating your names. All right. Well, let's see who we have here so far. We have Joel with the UTC, Fred with Enwick, Katie with Renewable Northwest, Kate with Renewable Northwest, Jim with the Sierra Club, Stefan with Public Council. That's 6. Pretty close to having, we don't have a quorum, but I like, over half of people being here before starting. So updating a few more names. All right, well, I declare us close enough to get going, and as other members join, I'll just welcome them and make sure people who are attending online can see this. So welcome everyone to the Resource Planning Advisory Group members, to also members of the public who are observing online. Thank you for being here. I see you. And to PSE staff, this is your June 12th Resource Planning Advisory Group meeting. And this is the meeting that's really focused on equity in the integrated resource plan. You can go to the next slide, please, Will. So in terms of webinar features, as panelists and Resource Planning Advisory Group members, you can use the chat, raise your hand, and all that good stuff. This isn't the webinar. We're not going to use the Q&A during this. And for members of the public, you can make a verbal comment at the end. Okay, next slide, please. My request, as always, be constructive, courteous, all that good stuff. Because this is live streaming, just kind of break down those acronyms. If we can't get to everything, or if you have a brilliant idea tomorrow at noon, you can use that feedback form. So Emily, can you just drop the feedback form link into the chat, please? And we're going to try to focus on the webinar topic. There's really a lot to cover. It's equity in resource planning is a really rich topic, so let's kind of stay in that realm. And public comment will happen at the end. Next slide, please. So our safety moment, apparently June is National Safety Month, and here are some office safety tips which apply and maybe don't apply if you work from home. It's always good to be neat and organized, make sure you have good exit routes, notify others of hazards. I should notify my 5-year-old whose room I'm in that there's too many Legos on the floor. And then keep computer and electrical cords managed or hidden. Next slide. So our speakers today, it's all PSE staff. This is the team that's making this happen. So Philip Popov, who's Director of Resource Planning and Analytics, Troy Hudson, who I believe you've met, who's the Director of Energy Equity, Brian Tyson, who's the manager of Clean Energy Planning and Implementation, Alexandra Karpov is the Energy Resource Planning Analyst, Tyler Tobin is the Senior Energy Resource Planning Analyst, Hannah Wall is an associate with the Energy Resource Planning Analyst, and Katrin Olson is an associate as well. And welcome, Ezra. Good to see you here. We're just getting going, so you haven't missed anything too exciting.
Thanks.
So next slide. So here's the agenda, and if I could ask Emily just to put in the chat the slide deck and the agenda from the website so that folks have that to follow on home if they want. Philip, as always, will recap what kind of feedback is happening out in the world and from RPAG members. Troy will talk about the energy equity program that PSE has at large. Brian will dial in a little bit more and talk about how that equity is reflected in the integrated resource plan. And then we're going to get even more specific. Alex will talk about the benefits and burdens of generic electric resources. Katrin will follow up with the benefits and burdens example. I know many of you, including myself, it helps to just really see how something is applied. We'll take a break. Tyler will continue with kind of the electric portfolio benefits analysis improvements, the maximum customer benefit scenario. And then Hannah will shift and talk about the gas portfolio. So what's happening on the gas side? As always, we'll end with public comment so that observers can have a chance to share some of their thoughts. And really, if observers or some of the RPAG members, if you've been at other recent meetings as part of this kind of equity series, what you'll notice today that is different is the level of detail. PSE was really intentional about trying to scale the content to the group. So if you guys like the weeds, you're going to get in the weeds today for sure. So with that in mind, before we launch into all of this great content, I do want to turn to Kara for just some quick updates. So go ahead, Kara.
Thanks, Sophie. Good morning. So yes, just a quick update and then we'll move along with the agenda. I wanted to let you all know that we did move forward last week with a filing at the Utilities and Transportation Commission asking to transition our current 2025 IRP process towards preparing for the new Integrated System Plan or ISP approach under House Bill 1589. I think I mentioned this to you all sometime in one of our May meetings that it was a possibility. We did make that filing last week. We are excited to get started on the new ISP, and we know that we need sufficient time to develop it, time for meaningful engagement with the public, with our customers, and with our advisory groups like the RPAG. And so in the filing, we did ask the commission to make a decision on our petition by July 1st. And part of that was so we would know somewhat soon whether to pivot our next RPAG meeting in mid-July, which is slated to be on the gas scenarios, whether we would pivot that to begin planning for the ISP, or if we're likely staying the course on the 2025 IRP. So all that said, it is up to the commission to determine what the timeline will be for considering our request. And so we will keep you posted as we learn more and how that could impact our RPAG schedule. And I guess one other thing to add is just today's equity discussion is important and relevant to our work either way, whether we proceed with the 2025 IRP, we'll incorporate it into our plans, or if our filing is approved, it will be a part of the 2027 ISP. So this is time well spent either way. And Sophie, with that, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kara. I'll pause there before you go off camera. Any questions for Kara about this filing? Not seeing any. Okay. Well, Will, you can go to the next slide. All right. So this meeting, many portions of this meeting are going to kind of move into that involved level in this International Association of Public Participation spectrum. And just kind of one way we really kind of want your active involved participation is that after kind of explaining the general equity program at PSE, we're going to share a mural board with the RPAG members here. And there's going to just kind of be ability for you to take notes while we're doing all these presentations. And it's just one more place that, you know, PSE can see in writing some of your comments. And so something a little bit more interactive. I know that many of you, you know, need to type or write to think. And so we're hoping that that will be a platform for some of you to really dive in. So we're looking forward to today. Next slide, please. All right, Philip, if you want to come on camera, you're going to connect the dot between the public track and the RPAG track for us. Please go ahead.
Great. Okay, good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. You know, we definitely heard quite a bit in our last meeting about the delivery planning, especially a lot about transmission. So just real quick, just to make sure it's clear what we're looking at in this IRP, we're really looking at, for transmission solutions, we're looking at cross cascades transmission solutions. We're looking at going to Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, other parts of Washington, Oregon, even up to BC with transmission on the Northern Intertie, and transmission that would be related to offshore wind. So all of those would be transmission solutions that would be part of the IRP that we're examining. We are starting to look more and more into reconductor and transmission lines. It's not that simple, like anything transmission related. Even if you want to say, well, we could just reconductor the line, or BPA could just reconductor the line from here all the way to Montana. Well, you might be able to do that, but it will have a lot of impacts on the whole transmission system, right? So this is something that needs to really be studied in the whole regional transmission sort of process, really, because it affects transmission across the whole region. So as those kinds of alternatives will get more and more incorporated into those regional transmission studies. And it's the same thing for our system, our local transmission, reconductoring a line, right? The electric system isn't as simple as there's a lake and a pipe and a faucet, right? It's more complicated than that. Making the wire bigger versus a new wire versus a different kind of wire can all have different kinds of effects that we just need to make sure are all fully studied. That's the kind of work that we need to do. Can't do that real quick, but that's starting to get incorporated into the studies. And then there was a question about, are we going to consider biodiesel for a peaking energy resource? We are really kind of transitioning away from biodiesel looking like it's terribly feasible, just because the shelf life isn't that long, and it's even more expensive than renewable diesel, without really any difference in the status of being renewable. I don't believe we're really looking at biodiesel. There's a difference between R99, right, versus biodiesel for peaking as the backup fuel for a peaker. So that's kind of where we're at with that. And we did a lot of investigating into biodiesel, and challenge with that is just the shelf life is really short, and this is not something you expect to burn very much, right? So you don't want it sitting around for that long. So
Yeah.
That's my report out on the feedback.
Thanks, Philip. I appreciate that. So I see Fred in the chat says it would be useful to have a walkthrough from the transmission planners about how PSE is going to assess reconductoring and other potential methods for expanding existing transmission capacity. Yeah, interesting thought. Philip, any reactions to that?
I think that's a fantastic thing to include in the IRP or in the ISP, right? Whichever direction that we go. But I think absolutely laying out what are we doing and how are we doing it. I think it's a great idea.
Great, thanks, Philip. And I just want to welcome John Ollis to the group. Hi, John. Good to see you today. Any other thoughts from Philip about what PSE has been hearing from the public? I remember last time with the RPAG reconductoring came out and I was busy Googling that on the side. So thanks for teaching me something new. All right, Philip, thank you so much. You can go to the next slide, please, Will.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring on Troy. Take it away, Troy.
Thanks, Sophie. So I'm Troy Hudson, Director of Energy Equity here at Puget Energy. First, thank you for the opportunity to update you on our efforts looking at energy equity over the past 18 months. Next slide. So we're focused on three key goals, making sure that we are meeting the regulatory requirements, which include the broader requirements in the Cascade Order, and then specific requirements in the last GRC and other regulatory proceedings. Along with that, we're also paying attention to some guiding principles that were developed in collaboration with our equity advisory group. So those are accountability, simplicity, and transparency are things that we consider as we're thinking about the work that we're doing here. Along with the goals, we have second goal is operationalizing equity, and that's focused on how do we make sure that we are making this easy for our staff to incorporate into the work that they're doing, and then strengthening partnerships and enhancing engagement. So we recognize that procedural justice and our engagement is sort of a key and challenging part of equity. And so that's something that we are continuing to focus on as a priority going forward. And these conversations with the RPAG and the other advisory groups is a key part of that. Next slide. So this is a reminder that equity is not an outcome. Instead, it's a process, and the process is really important. I try to tell folks not to get too caught up in trying to remember the names and sort of what they mean and become sort of fluent in that. The way I try to simplify it for our teams internally and other conversations we're having is to think about these. Recognition is really about identifying priority populations. And that's a term we're using to be inclusive of named communities and others. But who are the priority populations that we need to make sure we are focusing as we do our equity work? The second is procedural justice is really about how do we engage with those populations? How do we meet them where they are and make sure that our engagement is centered on them, either the individuals or the communities that they're a part of. And then next is distributional justice. And that's really all about what benefits do we provide to those communities and what burdens do we reduce. And increasingly in the different requirements, there are percentages attached to that. So the federal Justice 40, and then we have 30%, 35% based on different requirements within the state of Washington. And then finally, restorative justice. And this is all about sort of looking at the structural changes that we need to make so that they can be sustained going forward. And that's a key part of sort of how we think about this. But you'll be hearing more about that and how this is applied in the upcoming presentations. Next slide. So we're trying to make sure that we are being coordinated and aligned with the work we do across our engagements with customers and communities. And so we have a number of different relationships we think about and specific programs, starting with looking at our customer engagements, looking at our billing relief, and then programs to reduce energy savings. A key part of how we think about this is the energy burden for those customers. And that's a factor of looking at how much they're paying and then how much they're using. Next slide. And then finally, this is about, how are we looking at the different programs? So I wanted you to, as you listen to the conversation today and you engage, recognize that the integrated resource planning process is just one use case among many. So we're looking at resource acquisition, delivery system planning, facility design, siting and construction, the customer programs I mentioned, and then the clean energy implementation plan programs going forward. And so there's some key things we're focused on to make sure that the way we show up to communities and the way we approach this work is aligned and consistent across everything that we do. So with that, that's my sort of high-level overview of everything that we're doing and trying to keep all of this flowing in a way that makes sense to everyone involved. both our staff and the folks we engage with. So with that, I will stop. I think I'm at the end there. And then, but before I pass it off, happy to take questions. And it looks like Joel has a question.
Hi, Joel. Yeah.
I do. Yeah. Thanks, Troy. I appreciate this high level overview of how PSE is approaching equity. In the integrated resource plan section of this slide, I was just curious. I know that you know, in the IRP process, there's this public webinar track for customers to engage. The customer engagement bullet there under this IRP section, what is there? Are there other things that PSE is doing to engage customers in the planning process beyond just those public webinars, or is that really what this bullet is alluding to?
This bullet is focused on, it's highlighting the fact that customer engagement, public engagement is a key aspect, right, under procedural justice. So that's a key part of this, and that's what that's highlighting. So we have engagements with the RPAG, with the EAG, the Equity Advisory Group, as sort of the advisory groups portion of this. But then there is the public webinar to make sure we're engaging with the public. And then there's a broader, you'll hear more about that as part of the upcoming presentations, a broader effort to make sure that we are engaging with customers and community.
Thanks, Troy. Does that help, Joel? Great.
I think so. Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is mostly at least the sort of on the customer side, it is the public webinars, but I hear that there are other forums for input from other parties. Thanks.
Yeah, and Joel, I'll let you engage with the material, and if at the end you don't feel like it's addressed that completely, happy to come back on and go a little deeper.
Thanks for the question, Joel. It also really looked like you were on a ferry with the window. So if you are actually sailing somewhere interesting, we will all be jealous of you. Other questions for Troy about kind of PSE's energy equity program. And I think, Troy, in the beginning, you said 18 months. So this is a large body of work in the last year and a half. Other thoughts for Troy? All right. Well, thank you so much, Troy. We can go to the next slide, please, Will. Okay, next we're going to turn to Brian as we kind of move down the funnel and think about IRP and equity planning. So take us away, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Thanks, everyone. Good to be here to talk a little more, like Sophie said, a bit of a deep dive on how we're considering equity in this resource planning process. So Troy's set the stage for PSE and equity and the approach overall. Now we're going to drill down and talk more about what we're doing in the resource planning process. So really teeing up the conversation that Alexander and Tyler and Hannah and Katrin will have later on. But first, if we can go to the next slide, got to start high level, just talking about, and I think you all are well aware of this, just that we have both the electric side and the gas side of our utility. And so we have to consider both aspects as we get down into the weeds of the analysis that you'll see here today. As I mentioned, Alex and Tyler and Katrin are going to focus on the electric, and then Hannah will focus on the gas side here in this presentation. If we can go to the next slide. So we have a bit of different layers of how we approach resource planning. This layer, we were really focused on the 20-year process. So thinking about long-term needs, long-term resources, and this is really key as we talk about what we're doing in terms of our approach later on in this presentation. So we're not drilling down into the 10-year and 4-year where we really understand the specific action that we may be taking or the specific program we may be utilizing. This 20-year approach, again, I think you all are familiar with this, is really focused on generic resources. And so just keeping that in mind as we talk through some of the approaches as it relates to equity moving forward here. Now, some of you may be familiar, we do think about equity as we think about the 10-year approach, the CEAP, and of course the 4-year, the CEIP as well. And so that again, we drill down deeper because we have that information as it relates to who is being impacted or what the particular program or product is as we move forward in those 4-year chunks, 4-year increments here. Okay, can we get to the next slide, please? Again, this is just an overview of that resource planning process. So that first step, we're gathering all the data, which resources we use, what resources can be used to serve customers, what type of resources, going back to your conversation we just had about engaging with a number of the parties and customers, just trying to get feedback. That's essentially what we're doing here, right? Is trying to understand what resources we should use and the impacts, and building all these inputs so that we can run the model. So then once the model is run, in previous years, what was done was called a portfolio benefit analysis. And that was a process by which we looked at the portfolios, the different sensitivities that were run, and then we tried to measure some degree of how customers may benefit from a particular portfolio. And again, this was all using generic resources. So we had to make some assumptions about the magnitude or the amount of benefits, or who may or may not receive benefits. And then we did that as it relates to costs as well. So that was our initial approach that we did last year. And Alex and Tyler are going to talk later about how that approach has evolved and what we're looking to do for the 2025 IRP. I should also mention that in that portfolio benefit analysis, we use what were called customer benefit indicators. A lot of that work came from the CEIP back in 2021. And so we'll continue to use some of those that we believe are more attributable to this portfolio level, generic resource level process, and we can tease those out later on as well. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we've had a lot of feedback since we used that approach back in 2021 and for the electric progress report. We've done a lot of engagement, as Troy mentioned, with the EAG and other external parties for the IRP or public webinars or this group as well. We did use that portfolio benefit analysis for the electric progress report, but again, today we're thinking of how we can transition or move that piece into a different direction. And then we've also taken some initial steps and conversations about how we use it in the gas section as well. There's a couple pieces that we heard in the last iteration, which is really trying to understand a cost benefit analysis. So understanding what are some of those trade-offs and what are some of those quantitative dollars aspect of a particular benefit that we could potentially use in a model. So we'll talk a little bit about where we're at in that process. I think the other thing is the importance of understanding burdens and benefits. So understanding if you have a generic wind, solar, geothermal resource, whatever it may be, understanding, well, what are some of the inherent benefits or burdens of that resource? And then how may that understanding help us decide or move in a direction on a particular portfolio based on the mix of resources within it. That's really a key part of the discussion that Alex is going to have today, is how do we understand some of those benefits and burdens of some of those generic resources initially, so that it may help inform a portfolio sort of at the end. There was also an interest in adding, I mentioned customer benefit indicators. There was also an interest in adding a climate change resilience indicator. And that's something the team is continuing to consider and work on back behind the scenes internally. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so Joel, I think you and Troy just had a discussion on this and thinking about how we are talking about equity for various groups, advisory groups. So we have gone to the equity advisory group, as Troy mentioned, to talk about the electric piece. We did that back in May. We will go to the electric equity advisory group in June next week to talk about the gas piece. And then we've talked to the public. We had a public webinar last week to talk about both the gas and electric. And then for this group, focus on a little bit of gas and electric today, and we'll move to do more on the gas part in the future as well. So again, just laying out all the different groups, all the different touch points and engagement that we're doing as it relates to this approach to equity in the resource planning process. Okay, let's jump to what I believe is my last slide. Now, Troy had talked about these energy justice core tenets and really trying to map out and illustrate what each tenet is and what is the definition behind it. So what we want to do here is just tie the tenets, recognition, procedural, distributional, restorative, and tie it to the work that's being done for this resource planning process. So here you'll see all the different work streams that are going on as it relates to each tenet. And I'll highlight the ones that are in bold here. So when we think about recognition, understanding the who and understanding who may be burdened or who may receive benefits, we really think about starting at that recognition justice piece. And that's that first topic that Alex is going to talk about today, understanding what those benefits and burdens are and understanding who may be impacted by those burdens and benefits. Part of that recognition tenet there. Then later on, we'll talk about the portfolio benefit analysis, how we're going to carry that forward from what we did previously, and thinking about maximizing a maximum customer benefit sensitivity. So both of these analyses really get to the distributional piece because we're thinking about not just the who, but the magnitude and the quantity or quality of benefits or burdens that may be distributed based on a particular portfolio itself. So those are really the two tenets that we'll focus on in the conversation today, just thinking about recognition and distributional. Okay, so before I turn it over, Alex later on is going to talk about burdens, benefits, and generic resources, as well as portfolio benefit analysis. And I think Tyler is going to jump in and help out with that as well, and also talk about the maximum customer benefit sensitivity scenario. And then Hannah's going to come later on and talk about it on the gas perspective and talk about our approach in the gas IRP as it relates to equity.
Thank you, Brian.
Stop there. Thanks, Sophie.
Yeah. Any questions for Brian now that we're drilling down to your world of resource planning? Right. Not hearing any. Before we get into the details, I'm going to kind of introduce some of the more interactive parts of this meeting. So, Will, I'm going to steal your screen sharing for a moment. Emily, in the panelist chat, can you put the mural link, please? So maybe just show of hands, have any of you used Mural before? The online whiteboard, maybe? I got to see a little hand there. Okay. Look at all these tech savvy people. The most important thing is that you need to click view as a visitor. So you're going to click the link in the chat as soon as, there we go, Emily has it there. It'll pull something up. It won't exactly look like this, but click view as a visitor. And then it'll give you a fun name. I'd like to see, you know, wandering octopuses or whatever you all are going to be. Yes, I'm seeing a visiting spider, visiting sea turtle, et cetera, et cetera. So many of you are pro visitor link. Choose a name, you'll pop in here. And for those of you who are new to this platform, these are all sticky notes, and you can just zoom in and write your comments here. This is for comments and reactions. If you have a question, please put it in the Zoom chat or raise your hand and make it all like a normal meeting. We just want to kind of collect your live feedback as PSE walks through these kind of 4 major themes here. So kind of a live way to share some thoughts. And with that in mind, being kind of more on this involved, interactive portion of our meeting, if you're comfortable putting your camera on, I think that just really enhances our ability to have that dialogue. I know many of you joined the RPAG for that kind of two-way flow of information. So if you're eating lunch, don't worry about it, keep it off. But yeah, if we can see each other, all the better. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask Will to share the regular deck, and it's fun seeing all these visiting goats and visiting hippopotamuses and all the rest, and I look forward to seeing your chatter as you come up with different kind of reactions or thoughts. And welcome, Megan. I just saw that you joined it as well. You're joining at the perfect time. We're just diving into kind of the more technical aspects of equity and resource planning. So next slide, Will. Oh, I guess this is me. I guess I did that. Okay, next slide. So the feedback questions that are on that mural, and maybe Emily, just drop the mural link one more time. I wasn't sure when Megan joined and if she was able to see that, but in this mural link and or just with your voice, PSE wants to hear, what do you think about these proposed approaches, both new approaches about kind of generic resources, benefits and burdens, and also an evolution of what they did last time when it comes to kind of the portfolio benefit analysis. Are there other considerations you want to see? You know, let PSE know your thoughts on kind of these two questions. So next slide, please. All right, Alex, please share kind of the new work PSE is doing this cycle around benefits and burdens.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex, and I use she, her pronouns. I am an analyst on the electric IRP team at PSE. So I'm going to discuss this new approach that we are proposing to take in this IRP cycle to, I think, further our understanding of the energy burdens and benefits within the framework of the IRP. So just to note that, as mentioned before, we have presented this approach already to our Equity Advisory Committee in May, and then last week during our public webinar. So the content that I'm going to present today is similar to what I have presented in those last couple meetings, but Katrin, after I'm done sort of going over the approach, is going to go a little bit more into detail and give sort of an example of how we might apply this approach. So next slide, please. So again, building on what Brian mentioned, one of the things that we heard from interested parties during our 2023 progress report is that it really is important for us to really better understand the energy burdens and benefits in the IRP resulting from our preferred portfolio selection. So we used the portfolio benefit analysis in our last cycle, which was really based in really quantitative data. And Tyler will talk a little bit further on the updates that we've made to this approach. But what I'm going to approach right now is how we are sort of looking at building upon this equity approach in this cycle. And that really has started with this question of how do we deepen our understanding of equity in the IRP. And we have had a lot of conversations and a lot of guidance from Troy's team, from Brian's team. And what we have come up with is this approach to look at the burdens and benefits that might be inherent within the generic resources that we're using in the IRP. So one of the things that we think that we can address with this approach that we weren't able to address with our prior equity analysis is that we can really take a look into some qualitative considerations. And also, like thinking about like who is impacted by sort of our resource planning process is a really hard thing to do with generic resources, but we can, with this approach, address sort of a broad generalized location associated with the generic resources. And yeah, so finally, we think that like by doing this approach, we can really address that recognition justice tenet and get a better sense of equity in the IRP. So let's go to the next slide. So this slide was really developed, I think, for folks who might need reminding of what a generic resource is. But I think, so in this group here, I think the key takeaways that I just want to focus on is that generic resources are really placeholders in our IRP. So we are going to look at the sort of into the equity associated with those resources, but it doesn't mean that those are actually resources that we're going to go out and acquire. That is a process that will happen in the RFP process, which is outside of the IRP. So, but we do use these generic resources to really help us optimize the sizing of the different kinds of generating or storage resources and optimize the scheduling over our planning period. So yeah, I think that, yeah, also it's really hard to address equity in terms of who is going to be impacted when we are using a generic resource, because there isn't actually a specific site or a specific community that is going to be impacted. So if we can go to the next slide. So what we did to develop this generic resource burdens and benefits assessment is we really turned to the literature that is out there already that is looking into the equity associated with building actual real world resources in real communities. And some of our sources, a lot of our sources really include white papers published by national laboratories, including PNNL, NREL, the Berkeley National Laboratory, and we also consulted and were able to find some academic publications. So, you know, we have a pretty broad search here. And what we saw in this literature was a set of recurring elements associated with more equitable outcomes in these projects. And so what we propose to do in our assessment is to use these set of recurring elements as metrics to guide a qualitative and research-based analysis of the impacts of each of our generic resources. So we also found that as we dug into these metrics, they seem to really divide into three different scales of impact. So we see metrics addressing a global impact. We see metrics addressing the impact to utility customers. And then we also see the impact on communities and land that are either adjacent to or potentially within the footprint of a new generic resource. And it's entirely possible, just to throw it out there, that a particular resource might have elements that sort of fall into multiple of these categories, but we still found it sort of helpful to use this lens. And so what I'm going to do in the next couple of slides is just go through the metrics that we identified at each of these scales of impact, but I'm also happy to pause here for any questions, if that is helpful.
Questions for Alex and kind of the setup of all this? No. All right, Alex, carry on.
All right. So in the next slide, starting with the global scale of impacts, we have two metrics we were able to identify here. The first being greenhouse gas emissions. And then the other one is end-of-life effects. And when we're looking at end-of-life effects, we're really looking at what happens to this resource after the commercial life is over. So can it be repowered, repurposed, reused, recycled in any way? Or does it end up in a landfill? If we go to the next slide, we have 5 different metrics looking at the customer scale of impact. And so these are really the metrics that impact the end users of the energy that will be produced by a generic resource. And these might look really familiar because they're essentially recycled customer benefit indicator metrics. So they include participation in clean energy programs, home comfort, frequency and duration of outages, access to clean and reliable energy, and also any energy cost burdens. All right, next slide. So then we have 10 metrics that we're looking at on the resource footprint scale of impact. And it's really starting at the top there with the disproportionately impacted communities. And we think that we might be able to look at and answer that question to an extent, even though that we don't have citing information explicitly. We can sort of infer some things about specific generic resources. Like, for example, we know that a wind farm is more than probably 100% likely to be sited in a rural community. It's not likely to be sited in, say, downtown Seattle. So we can say that we know it's going to be somewhere located in a rural community, and that could overlap with a disproportionately impacted community. And next, another metric that we are looking at is, will local energy service be provided? And again, using the example of wind, any wind that we might invest in or use is likely to be located east of the Cascades, and therefore will need to be transmitted over the Cascades into PSE service territory, and therefore any community that is within the footprint of this wind resource will actually not directly benefit by being able to use that energy. So those are sort of those first two metrics that we're looking at. And then the other ones I feel like are pretty self-explanatory. There's change in land use, potential viewshed changes. Will the resource produce noise that will affect the community? How will community safety be impacted? And then what about outdoor air quality, community health? Will this resource create jobs? If they create jobs, what will be the quality of the job? Will they be full-time or part-time jobs? Will they be unionized? We're also looking at decommissioning effects, and this is a little bit different than that end of life effect on the global impact scale. So this decommissioning effect is really meant to look at what are the impacts on the community from taking down that resource. Will there be job loss? Will the land be usable for something else within that community? Or will it need to go through some sort of remediation process? And finally, what are sort of the environmental impacts? So what are the impacts on wildlife and plant communities? And yeah, so next slide, please. So to reiterate, our plan is really to use these metrics to guide a qualitative equity assessment. And we essentially plan to include this assessment as a narrative in our IRP documents or our planning documents. We have a section typically in an appendix where we describe in detail our assumptions around our generic resource technology. So it's the section that includes a review of our cost assumptions, our operating assumptions, market availability of the technology, and now the section will also include this potential burdens and benefits as part of that technology description. We also see this analysis as really being able to inform our portfolio benefit analysis, which is more of it's the equity assessment that we used last year. It's more of a quantitative assessment, but we think we can roll over sort of some of this information and help inform how we're performing that analysis. And Tyler will discuss that imminently here. And then ultimately, again, we just see this as a way to better understand which portfolios might contain the most equity enabling characteristics and hopefully help us select a good preferred portfolio. So yeah, I think to summarize, we think this strategy really broadens our equity assessment and enables us to look more comprehensively at all the different equity components that might be contained in our portfolios. And so this really wraps up my portion. So I can either, again, pause for questions or comments, or I can turn it over to Katrin, who will go through a couple of examples of what this assessment. Oh yeah, there's some questions.
There's some questions brewing. I'm encouraging people to ask the questions in our Zoom environment, not the mural board. The mural is kind of for comments, but I see your gears are turning. So I welcome, perfect. I see a hand from you, Kate, please.
I wrote mine on the mural board, but I can just ask it live.
Great.
Thanks so much, Alexandra. I was curious if some of those on the last slide, like I saw decommissioning and recycling as an example, if they will take into account existing Washington state law that requires, for instance, like all solar panels to be recycled beginning in July of 2025. Like curious how that type of assessment plays into end of life considerations.
I think that is great feedback. We have been looking at sort of the literature that's already published, and I think in some cases, like in noise, we've turned to what local jurisdictions like guidance has on like noise effects. So we certainly will definitely consider what laws are in place because that's directly applicable. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would just recommend doing that because like the end of life of a solar panel in maybe a different state would look a lot different than the end of life of a solar panel in Washington, where it's required to be decommissioned in a way that's environmentally friendly, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great consideration.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kate. I see a hand from Megan.
Hi, thanks, Alexandra. And I also put this in the mural board, but I'll ask it on the Zoom. I was wondering if you could clarify the ways that some of these benefits and burdens will assist in the preferred portfolio selection. Is there any sort of quantitative way that some of these will be will assist in that selection, or is it all just how PSE sees, like, is there any standard way that they're going to be incorporated into the selection?
Yeah, great question. And the reason I didn't go further into detail is actually Tyler is going to sort of describe how we have reconfigured our portfolio benefit analysis, which is sort of it's our tool that is going to take our portfolios and evaluate them for different equity enabling components. And we've developed an approach where we're essentially feeding this assessment into how we're scoring different elements and different metrics in that portfolio benefit analysis. So Tyler will address that in a lot more detail coming up here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for now? All right, let's let Hannah run through an actual example, and then we're going to pull back and we're going to ask, what do you think about this proposed approach? What other considerations, such as the ones we just heard from Kate and others, should PSE keep in mind? So let's go to the next slide. Will, take it away, Katrin.
Hi, I'm Katrin Olson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the analysts on the IRP team. And I've been working with Alex on the burdens and benefits assessment of our generic resources. And I'm going to present two examples, land-based wind and lithium-ion batteries today. Next slide, please. Land-based wind is a renewable energy source that produces no emissions and contributes to CETA. It is also a variable resource that can contribute to base load. Land-based wind is typically located in rural areas, which could potentially be disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. Here we are looking at the different scales and metrics that Alex previously presented for metrics relevant to wind. Under global impacts, land-based wind is a renewable resource that does not emit greenhouse gas. End-of-life effects and waste produced by land-based wind. So a large amount of the mass of wind turbines is recyclable, but the blades are normally not recycled and put into a landfill. Overall, even with manufacturing, construction, and end-of-life emissions, wind turbines still produce significantly less emissions over their lifetime than natural gas and coal. For the PSE customer scale, wind energy is a low cost and clean energy for PSE customers. The other metrics that we are looking at on the PSE customer scale are really served by distributed resources, demand response, and conservation. However, wind is one of the most cost-effective resources and a clean resource. Moving on to project footprint impacts, there are land view changes. This typically has low impact on the landscape due to the rural location of most wind farms, but some residents living nearby may be irritated by the wind turbine presence. This could be in relation to their attitude towards wind turbines, as well as their view of the aesthetics of wind turbines. However, over time, there may be some self-selection where people who have positive attitudes about wind turbines or like the way wind turbines look end up moving and living near them. There is some noise, which can cause annoyance for some residents living nearby. There's debate in the research if noise and annoyance from the noise directly or indirectly leads to health effects. This is linked to many different factors such as attitude, place identity, economic participation, and perceived industrialization of local landscapes. Many studies have linked noise from wind turbines to annoyance, and there just needs to be more research done to determine if noise annoyance has effects on sleep and health. However, wind turbines do have to be a certain distance from residential buildings. In Washington, that is mostly left up to counties. So for example, in Garfield County, where PSC is Lower Snake River Wind Farm is located, the required distance is a minimum of 400 meters or 4 times the total extended height of the wind energy tower, whichever is greater. At 300 meters away, the average wind turbine noise is between 35 to 45 decibels, which is below the minimum noise regulations in Washington of 60 decibels during the day and 50 at night. For impact on wildlife, wildlife does tend to leave wind farm areas. It's unclear if this is due to construction or the noise from wind turbines has an effect on the animals. There needs to be more research done to figure out what the land-based wind effect has on wildlife. Under the job metric, there seems to be a disconnect on where people are located geographically and where jobs in the wind industry are located. The decommissioning effects from wind may economically impact the community due to loss of jobs, and there also are some environmental impacts with noise and ground disturbance. That covers our land-based wind assessment. Moving on to batteries. Next slide, please.
Katrin, let's just pause for a half second. I think there's a siren going by where you are.
Yeah, sorry.
You don't need to apologize for sirens. I just want to give that a moment to clear. Talk about noise. It's very actually relevant. Look at that. Okay, I hear it's quieter in your end. Carry on.
All right, next slide, please. Thank you. So batteries can increase renewable energy available to the grid and help meet peak demand. They can also reduce the need for new transmission or distribution infrastructure. Some possible locations for batteries could be co-located with wind or solar near existing substations, with the possibility of batteries being located in a named community. Next slide, please. Thank you. For global impact, batteries are a non-emitting resource, and batteries actually have about 1/14 of the lifetime of CO2 equivalent emissions of a coal-fired plant. End of life for batteries can be costly, and recycling batteries is expensive. currently is that there's research being done on improving the process of recycling batteries. For customer impacts, batteries can be turned on when variable resources are not generating and contributes to energy reliability and keeping the lights on without using emitting energy sources. Batteries are a proven technology and cost-effective dispatchable energy within our 2025 IRP resources. For project footprints, there are some safety risks with these batteries. This is due to fire. There are several notable fires that happened in California and Arizona, which resulted in shelter-in-place advisories or 2-week evacuations. If there is a fire from this battery, there are several toxic flammable gases that are released into the air, impacting neighboring communities. Fire hazard is resulting from the battery shorting, and the next generation batteries will have improved design to help reduce this risk. There's also a possibility of increased noise with these batteries. The operation of lithium-ion batteries generates noise. However, if located more than 1,000 feet from project site, this noise is below most nighttime residential thresholds of 45 decibels. Noise can be mitigated using sound barrier walls as well. Lithium-ion batteries create minimal operation and maintenance jobs, around 5 to 10 jobs created. The operation of the system will likely be remote, with staff visiting the site 1 time per week. And if the battery is co-located with a renewable resource like wind or solar in Eastern Washington or elsewhere, it is not likely to serve the local community. However, a utility scale battery could be located within PSE service territory. If so, it would serve the local community. This wraps up this section. I'm going to turn it over to Sophie for our discussion section for our approach.
Thank you so much, Katrin. I appreciate you walking through that. I see all of the visiting animals in this mural board have a lot to say on this topic. We have 15 minutes now just kind of for that dialogue. So RPAG members, tell us, what do you think about this proposed approach? What other considerations? So let's see some hands and get a conversation going. Great, Joel, please.
Yeah, thanks, Katrin. I guess one question I had, or something I noticed at least, was that, non-emitting resources at the global scale, so I'm assuming we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions there. There's already a requirement for PSE to meet CETA standards. And so I'm wondering for that, and then also on this slide contributes to reliability. PSE already in their IRP process has resource adequacy analysis that ensures that future portfolio, or that their preferred portfolio will meet certain resource adequacy requirements. What benefit, I guess, is there in including that in these generic resources in this way that doesn't already exist, and just having the model be bound by CETA standards in 2030 and 2045, and also have it bound by the resource adequacy standard that PSE has for its portfolio? I guess what additional benefit is there in including that here, and does that kind of represent a double counting of those benefits if it's included in both parts of the analysis?
Thanks, Joel. Question about potential double counting. I don't know, Alex, do you want to give this one a go or turn to a colleague?
Yeah, I can give it a go. Feel free, anybody else, to jump in too. I think that that's a really good point, Joel. I think that the double counting situation, I think, is like, we are in the process of refining what metrics that we're looking at for this analysis. And that paper, I was just reviewing that paper by the Berkeley lab. Sorry, it's the one on the distributional, like DER. Oh my gosh, I have it up here somewhere. I will put that in the chat at some point, but it had some guidance on making sure how to select resources, or metrics that don't overlap and don't double count. And so I was like, oh, we should probably go through this and refine some of that. So I think that that's a good I think next step for sort of refining this tool. In terms of, I think, like the reliability and the like the non-emitting or the greenhouse gas metric, I think that yes, like all of the portfolios will meet our reliability, you know, and meet our needs. So we will be comparing between different portfolios that all essentially, you know, meet our customer needs and meet these standards. But I think that it gives a little bit more nuance into, you know, sometimes that reliability is also linked to distributed batteries, and like we've gotten a lot of feedback that, you know, distributed resources can sort of on a micro scale help increase reliability within smaller communities, or, you know, say an apartment building. So I feel like there are some equity considerations that we can measure with this metric, just looking sort of between portfolios. But I think that we're entirely open to your thoughts, and if it does seem like a double counting, like, you know, we can reconfigure which metrics that we're looking at. We're pretty open to all the feedback and making adjustments. Greenhouse gas emissions, different resources are going to, in their, you know, sort of lifetime, manufacturing to decommissioning, are going to have different greenhouse gas emissions associated with them. And so it seems to us at this point that that's still not double counting. Again, within that, there's going to be a different level of impact for different resources that we're considering. But
yeah,
again, open to feedback.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate that. And if any of your colleagues have anything to add, perhaps this could go into the feedback report, but I think that addressed it. Other questions or comments? I do see something in the mural board having to do with the weighting of different of these impacts. Does someone want to speak to that so we could have a live conversation? Okay, maybe.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you meant someone from PSE or the person who left that comment.
Yes, if that was you, Megan, please expand on that question, and then we'll have the conversation.
Yeah, I was just looking through these different benefits and burdens, and they do have different amounts of impact, to my knowledge, on people and their health impacts. I know outdoor air quality is a big concern for adverse health impacts. And so if you could just talk a bit about how those are weighted, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Alex, can I turn to you for that one again, or is that okay? Go ahead.
Sorry, was trying to find my unmute button. Yes, I think that currently we are not looking at, so in this burdens and benefits assessment, this is a real qualitative and narrative approach to sort of trying to take a look at all the different impacts that sort of on a high level, but a broad level, take a look at those impacts that generic resources might have. In terms of how they filter into, I think, how we evaluate each of the different portfolios, again, I think that's, I'm going to put that further down to Tyler's section, where he's going to talk about how we're evaluating each of the portfolios in our portfolio benefit analysis. Does that answer?
Yeah,
enough?
Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Great. Thanks for the question, Megan. Any other either questions or just feedback for PSE on this generic resources, benefits, and burdens concept that they're using for the first time? No? Okay. Well, we're ahead of schedule. What a lovely feeling that is. Let's take a slightly earlier break because our next segment is a long one. So let's all come back at 11:20. So that's just about at least 11:20 Pacific time. It's about 9 or so minutes. So thanks everyone. We'll see you in 9 minutes. All right, if everyone can regather. Hello, Ezra's back, Jim is back. Let's see, Froy, welcome, Froy. You joined just as we were taking our little early break. But it's great to see you. Katie's back, Stefan's back. Let's see him. Megan's back. Joel is back. I think that is our critical mass. So wonderful to see you all. Let's get the slide deck going again, Will. So this was hinted at earlier when there was a question about, the qualitative versus quantitative approaches. And I think Tyler, for all you people who crave the quantitative, are going to give you some information that you're craving to see. And so, Emily, can you repaste the mural board link in the chat for Froy and others? And for this topic, let me just get myself in order. Froy, make sure you click enter as a visitor. That's just kind of the first note there. So if you enter as a visitor, Froy, we're using this mural board to take notes as kind of a group as we work through all the slide decks here. So the portfolio benefit analysis improvements, that's the purple area, the purple sticky notes. And so as Tyler is walking through all of this, just add your thoughts in response to the questions of how the proposed approach is working from your standpoint. Let's do questions live, hand raising, that sort of stuff, because we want to just make sure that members of the public or others can really benefit from your questions as well. So with that in mind, Tyler, please jump in.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Tyler Tobin, an energy planning analyst on the IRP team, work mostly on the electric portfolio. I'm going to talk about our portfolio benefit analysis tool and some improvements we've made. Feel free to stop me along the way with questions. I think we've got plenty of time and a small enough group, so happy to engage. Next slide, please, Will. All right, so we developed this portfolio benefit analysis tool for the 2023 Electric Progress Report. And the objective of the tool is to allow us to see which portfolios developed as part of our IRP modeling process provide the most equity enabling benefits. So this is our kind of quantitative, objective way to look at all of our portfolios and provide some sort of measure on portfolios that we feel provide more equity versus less, and then we can use that information to make some decisions as we move toward developing a preferred portfolio. So this year, so from the 23 progress report, we made a number of improvements, and we're kind of adapting what we're calling a scorecard methodology, which moves away from kind of this relative kind of automated process that we had in the 23 progress report. And some of the drivers for these questions were stakeholder feedback, and then internally, our energy equity process at PSE has really developed over the last 18 months, as Troy has mentioned. So we feel like this new methodology aligns better with other aspects of PSE. Our distribution system planning department has a similar related methodology, and we're able to pass this kind of new process on to the gas IRP, and you'll hear from Hannah later on in this presentation. And then, we feel like this is a little more transparent and easy to understand. We're not doing any complicated math in the background that you need to understand. And some of our improvements allow us to compare portfolios across different time scales. So if you remember back to Brian's slide where we've got the IRP looking at 20 plus years, all the way down to our clean energy implementation plan that looks at just 4 years. Our previous methodology didn't allow comparing those two time scales, but with some of the improvements we've made in this cycle, we feel we can compare portfolios across those different time horizons. So next slide, please. This is a diagram that illustrates kind of where our equity analysis, this portfolio benefit analysis, happens in our IRP portfolio modeling process. So all the way on the left, we've got some gray circles that are supposed to represent all of our generic resources. And then attached to each of those generic resources, we're going to have burdens and benefits. And that really comes directly from the presentations that Alex and Katrin just provided on the burdens and benefits analysis. Those qualitative measures will be translated into quantitative scores of 0 and 1. And those scores get attached to each of our resource options. And then we go through our Aurora long-term capacity expansion modeling to develop all sorts of different portfolios to look at different sensitivities and eventually develop our preferred portfolio. After that Aurora modeling process, we've got a bunch of different portfolios that are composed of different resource mixes. And then those portfolios are passed into our equity analysis, and that's our portfolio benefit analysis. So that green down arrow is really like illustrating that that's the tool that gets used to work to assign that equity analysis. We can look at all those different portfolios composed of different resources, which all have different scores, and average all those scores for all those different resources to assign an equity enabling score for each of the portfolios. And we can look at those portfolios, the equity score versus the cost for those portfolios, and learn a lot about which types of resources and programs and resource mixes allow for the most equity enabling portfolio at the best cost. So we can use all that information to either go back and build some more portfolios with that Aurora long-term capacity expansion tool and kind of create a little feedback loop where we learn a little bit, do some more quantitative modeling, and then look at the results. And eventually we can use all that information to evaluate and choose a preferred portfolio for the IRP process. All right, I don't see any questions. Oh,
I see one hand. Go ahead, Joel.
Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate this graphic and the sort of, next iteration on what PSE approached in the 23 progress report. Something I like about this personally is that now you're including some of these potential equity benefits kind of up front, as opposed to just doing it after the fact once the model has run. But I am curious to know what does Aurora do with these equity scores that are assigned to generic resources? Is that a language that Aurora speaks? I kind of understood it to more speak in the language of the characteristics of the resources in energy terms and the cost of those resources. So can you explain how, I think there's enough modeling nerds on this call that this will be a worthwhile question. What does it do with an equity score?
Yeah, thanks, Joel. So maybe this diagram is a little misleading. Aurora doesn't look at those equity scores. I think we put them at the front of the process to illustrate that we assign those scores before we do any sort of modeling work in Aurora. It's a priority score, so we've assigned it before we do any work. So there's no sort of bias in selecting resources or it doesn't impact any of the other inputs. And this process is happening concurrently to the burdens and benefits analysis that Alex described. So I think it was put in the front of the process to illustrate that it happens kind of separate as part of our input development process, but Aurora doesn't look at those equity scores at all. Our portfolio benefit analysis is where our equity analysis happens, and Aurora is where our least cost resource selection happens.
Thanks. That was a good clarifying question there, Joel. Ezra, I see your hand.
Yeah, on a similar measure, I mean, you have in this graphic at least, sort of a binary 1, 0, 0, 1, which was kind of our discussion earlier. So is that basically the level of discrimination that is being used in this analysis? And I understand what you're saying, that no, Aurora does not use that like as part of its optimization program or anything like that. But when it comes out, it seems like you could pretty easily, either before or after Aurora, assign, to the extent there is some scoring. I guess this is really two questions. One is about whether that's just the level of discrimination, either it has an impact or it doesn't. And two, are you then going to say, okay, these are the portfolios we considered in Aurora, here's the cost, here's the equity implications, because obviously that's just, what resources were picked times whatever their scores are on different equity metrics. That was not a very clear question, but see what you can do with it.
Right. Thanks, Ezra. Yeah, so I'll give you a simple answer now, and I think as my presentation progresses, hopefully I get at some of the nuance of your question. But the level of resolution that we decided to apply to our scoring is a 0 or a 1. Either it provides some benefit or it does not confer some burden to each of those metrics. And we chose that to keep it simple, keep it transparent. And this also aligns with some other work in our distribution system planning. They use a binary 0-1 scoring as well. And we're hitting the ground running. This is kind of a new methodology. Simple seemed better. So we're open to other ideas, but this is where we got started, and you'll kind of see where this takes us, and happy to receive some feedback if we want to take a deeper dive into scoring.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that I don't think it makes sense, especially as we are looking at generic resources. The question is this an impact that we need to even consider for this resource? So it seems to me that 0 or 1 probably is about as deep as you can go for a generic resource. So I appreciate that clarification.
Yeah, thanks, Ezra.
And just noting that Megan was saying there's a ton of links to the question that she had earlier about weighting. So it's all looping back together.
Yeah, I think we'll get there.
Great. Well, Tyler, let's have you carry on. And RPAG members, those purple sticky notes are looking a little lonely. So any thoughts you have as we continue to get deeper and deeper into this modeling land, feel free to share. So go ahead, Tyler.
All right. Yeah, I think, let's move on to the next slide, please. All right. So the last slide was kind of where our portfolio benefit analysis lands in our overall portfolio development. This is kind of the steps of our portfolio benefit analysis. So getting into, the mechanics of our tool. So step 1 here is to score generic resources for each of the equity metrics. As I mentioned previously, this is an extension of the burdens and benefits analysis that Alex and Katrin discussed earlier. And as we just discussed, we're using a binary scoring system. So 0 or 1, whether that resource confers some sort of benefit or does not result in a burden for each of those specific metrics. Once all those resources have been scored, we're going to extract some results from our Aurora analysis. So Aurora will provide us a list of different resources that were added to a portfolio. We take that information and aggregate it all for all the different portfolios we've run, and we also extract the total portfolio cost for each of those portfolios. So that's kind of the information coming from our Aurora long-term capacity expansion modeling. And then once all that data has been extracted, we want to aggregate all of the metrics together on a portfolio basis, because we're not scoring individual resources. We want to know what that mix of resources, that total portfolio, results in terms of its equity enabling characteristics. So all of those individual generic resource scores are multiplied by the percentage they compose of the portfolio. So, you've got a mix of wind and solar and batteries. Based on that mix, we can multiply the metrics by the composition of the portfolio to get an overall portfolio score. And maybe just to head off Megan's question, each of our metrics are weighted equally right now. We've got a lot of different metrics. They all, confer different burdens and benefits, and those burdens and benefits can differ depending on who you ask. So we thought a really great starting place was all of these are going to be weighted equally. We can look at the results, understand them. As our process continues to evolve, we can consider adding some weights into specific metrics that may be more important to the majority of our customers. But we need to have a long dialogue if we're going to start to assign any sort of weighting. So after all those are aggregated, then we want to go through and review the results and learn from this analysis. So when we review results, we plot the aggregated equity score against cost for all those different portfolios, and we get a nice scatter plot of where portfolios provide most equity will be far to the right, and low cost will be near the bottom of the y-axis. So we can get a good visual representation of the relative equity benefit and cost burden of each of the portfolios, and use that to decide which types of resources which types of resource mixes provide the best equity enabling characteristics at the lowest cost. Give that a pause for a second.
Not seeing any hands or questions. Maybe something will come up when people see it actually plotted out.
Yeah, we'll get there in a couple of slides. The next slide. So this is kind of broadly how our process operated in the 23 progress report and how it will operate in the 25 IRP. This slide that you're viewing now gets into some of the major differences and improvements we've made from our 23 progress report into this new 25 IRP planning cycle. So I've organized this slide to look like we've transposed the steps from going across the screen horizontally to vertically. So step one here is where we score those generic resources. In the 23 progress report, if you remember, and maybe we could get a link put into the chat. We did release our portfolio benefit analysis in Appendix I of the 23 progress report. If you'd like a refresher, that's available to you. Anyway, so in the 23 progress report, we used some metrics extracted directly from our Aurora modeling output to represent various metrics within our portfolio benefit analysis tool. So for example, greenhouse gas emissions, we could extract we had a metric, a customer benefit indicator that was linked to greenhouse gas emissions. So we could get the tons of greenhouse gas emissions for each of our portfolios and extract that directly from Aurora. That was great because it was very quantitative. We thought that would be a good path forward, but we realized that many of these burdens and benefits don't have a direct link to an output that we could extract from Aurora, which is what led us to scoring our resources individually on a qualitative basis. So that 0 or 1 scoring that we've discussed, that allows us to incorporate qualitative metrics and provide scores for many different types of metrics that may not be directly linked to Aurora. In step 2, where we extract results, so things in bold on this slide, I should note, are things that have changed, and things in normal font are things that have kind of remained the same. So in the 23 progress report, we extracted some information from Aurora, the portfolio resource selections and the portfolio cost. That's remained the same into the 25 IRP. However, the data to confer burdens or benefits on each of these resources has changed. So a link to in the 23 progress report, we go back to step 1 where we get that data directly out of our Aurora models, kind of a posteriori. So, we've observed a result of our model, and taken some data. Whereas in the 25 IRP, those metrics are scored a priori. So we give them a score before any sort of modeling happens. In step 3, so that's where we do our aggregation. In the 23 progress report, all of our aggregation was performed on a relative basis. So how we developed an index that was based at 0 for our reference portfolio, so our lowest cost portfolio. And then we use standard deviations to measure how far away each of those metrics were. So whenever we added a new portfolio to our mix of different portfolios, all of the scores would change because all of those standard deviation information would change. And we felt like that maybe wasn't the most transparent way to do our analysis, because if you added or subtracted any portfolios, your answer would change. So we moved to a absolute scoring basis where we can cross multiply to get an average equity enabling score for each portfolio based solely on the 0 and 1 scores for each of the metrics for each of the resources. This allows us to add or subtract portfolios, and each portfolio will stay fixed regardless of addition or subtraction of portfolios to the analysis. And then finally, when we compare review results, where we compare the equity score to the portfolio cost, in the 23 progress report, we used the total portfolio cost. So you'll see a big old price tag and many billions of dollars for our 20+ year modeling horizon. And then 25 IRP, we've altered that slightly. So we have normalized the portfolio cost based on the peak demand for that year that we're modeling. So this allows us to look at portfolio costs for different time horizons. So for example, we're looking at an IRP process where we look out to 2045. We're going to have many more resources added, so portfolio cost will be much higher, but also our peak demand is much higher as we get out to 2045. If we wanted to compare that to our next 4 or 5 years in a CEIP planning period, we need to add much fewer resources over the next 4 or 5 years, driven by a much lower peak demand. So our normalization factor allows us to compare those two different timescales simultaneously on the same plot. And that was a lot of information, so I'll take a little pause.
Yep, take a sip of water. Questions on this kind of comparison of 2023 versus 2025? Also noting that Ray put in the chat the 2023 information that Tyler referred to earlier. Questions or comments? It was a lot of information, but it was clear, so I'm not seeing anything for the moment. So please carry on, Tyler.
Great. Next slide, please, Will. All right, so I promise we're going to get to some results, but a few more like input changes and kind of framing for our model before we get there. But I think this may be a good discussion topic as well. So I mentioned we've got a number of different metrics, and we want to score those on a 0 or 1 basis. This slide is our initial thoughts on how we want to score each of our resource categories. So on the second column here is a description of our metrics, and you'll notice that these metrics align with the global PSE customer scale and project footprint scales that Alex described in her portion of the presentation, and each of the metrics underneath those categories should align with the metrics on her slides. So we take those metrics and we need to translate them into a 0 or a 1, what we're calling a criteria score, or criteria to score a 1 or criteria to score a 0. And we've given some broad definitions to help us make those decisions. And I think we plan to build this up with a much more formal process, but these are initial thoughts and we'd welcome any feedback. And I can run through our thoughts really quickly if that would be helpful.
I think it'd be helpful. I think, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Joel.
Sorry, I have some thoughts and questions on this slide, but if you're not finished running through, you might answer some of them if you're not done with this one yet. So
maybe I'll take a quick pass and then we can come back for a discussion.
Great.
Cool. All right, so under the global scale, we've got reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Our general thoughts are if you're a net zero resource, you'll receive a 1 for that, you get a benefit. But if you emit greenhouse gases, you won't get you get a 0. End of life impacts. Right now, our thoughts are if you have physical structures, then you won't receive a benefit. There'll be some sort of processing that needs to happen at the end of that project's life cycle, whereas demand response programs and energy efficiency, they provide energy benefits without needing physical infrastructure. Moving on to the PSE customer scale, an increase in participation in clean energy programs. So these are anything that provides customer programs directly. So that encompasses our energy efficiency, demand response, and specific distributed energy resources, whereas larger utility scale resources don't provide customers the ability to interact with those energy products directly. Improved home comfort, you'll receive credit for that if you are energy efficiency, whereas most of the other resources we're considering are just provide energy, and they all provide kind of the same value in the form of electricity. Decrease in frequency and duration of outages. We've provided storage, demand response, thermal, and nuclear resources. These are our dispatchable resources. Variable energy resources like wind and solar would not receive credit. Improved access to reliable clean energy. These are, again, targeted at, this is derived from a customer benefit indicator, which really targets those customer programs. So distributed storage is what's been defined through our clean energy implementation processes, contributing as a specific action for that customer benefit indicator. So we're retaining that, and other resources would not. Reduce energy cost burdens. So we try to think about resources that are lower cost or provide some sort of monetary benefit to customers. So that's our large utility scale resources, energy efficiency, which can reduce customer bills, and demand response, which can provide a cash benefit to customers who participate. And more expensive resources, such as emerging technologies and distributed resources, would not give credit to reducing energy cost burdens. Siting. So we're still thinking about this one. I will direct any questions to Alex. She's our mastermind. So if you have any feedback on how we want to score siting, particularly for disadvantaged communities, please let us know. Local energy service provided. So this assumes you get credit if you're within PSE service territory, whereas if you're outside of PSE service area, you will not receive credit. Increase the quality and quantity of jobs. So these are energy efficiency and demand response, and other resources will not receive credit. And again, this is a customer benefit indicator. So those specific actions are linked to our criteria scores from the 23 biennial update. Change number 11 here, change in land use and view shed. So those big utility scale wind and solar resources are the ones that impact your view sheds most dramatically. So they do not receive credit. we wanted to think about, many of these exposure type metrics can be mitigated through engineering solutions or zoning type things. So we're really thinking about mitigation measures here. So if there are mitigating measures available, such as zoning around wind farms or battery storage facilities, you'll receive credit. Whereas if those measures are not available yet, you'll not receive credit. Community safety. So these resources are ones that may contribute to poor outcomes if there are failures at the site. So we're thinking lithium-ion batteries have the potential to cause toxic exhaust from fires, nuclear impacts through long half-lives, and thermal resources through leaks and emissions at the stack. Will not receive credit, and other resources that don't have those land use impacts, soil impacts, water impacts will receive credit. Improve outdoor air quality, so non-emitting resources will receive credit, whereas those that emit any sort of less than desirable gases will not receive credit. Improve community health. So these are similarly linked to metrics 13 and 14. If you're non-emitting, non-toxic, you'll receive credit, whereas if development of those resources does increase emissions or has potentially toxic impacts, you will not receive credit. Decommissioning benefits again, this is another one where we're still thinking about churning the wheels. So if you have feedback, happy to hear it. And then potential wildlife and community impacts. Again, all of these resources have the potential to cause impacts to wildlife and plant communities. If there's mitigating measures available, we'll give you credit, but if not, you'll not receive credit. All right, that was a lot, but hopefully that clears up some of our discussion, some of our thoughts on how we're scoring these resources.
Yeah, I think walking it through at least help my brain. We know Joel had a question. Joel, was your comment or question addressed, or should we have a conversation?
I had a lot of questions and comments.
We have time.
Probably some of them were addressed, but I still have more, and happy to share some thoughts that I had, at least looking over this for the first time. I think some of them tie back to things I mentioned earlier. The kind of the double counting potentially with different things, reliability, greenhouse gas emissions, which appear in other parts of the planning analysis, overarching analysis. Not sure if there's a need to address those again within this, but I'm certainly interested in hearing other folks' thoughts. That also could be the case for cost considerations, though I don't want anyone to quote me as suggesting that I'm not concerned with the cost of these portfolios and resources, but that's like the key thing that the Aurora model is doing, really, is optimizing for cost, right? So including that here, again, seems like it could be a double counting issue, and again, open to other folks' thoughts on any of that. There were a couple of the resources that are on the 1 or the 0 side of the score that in different criteria that seemed a little bit odd to me. For example, in let's see, what was it? In reliability. In the physical structure decommissioning, where's that number 2 here? Minimal end of life effects. So I guess I just wanted to point out here, I guess that there are pretty different end of life impacts of different kinds of structures. I think notably, like lumping the end of life impacts of a nuclear facility is pretty different than decommissioning a solar farm. So I think that just seems like a bit of a weakness in the binary scale here. Another thing I wanted to point out was
Well, do we want to just actually pause?
Oh,
'Cause
sure.
I
Yeah,
want
we
to
can
make sure
pause.
that Tyler can get
Sorry.
to these. This is a good stack here. So Tyler, maybe just Joel, jog our memory. What was the first one about?
Well, so the double counting issue, which I've already talked about, so we don't need to linger on. I think that's why I wanted to plow forward. But Tyler, if you have other considerations that Alexandra didn't address earlier, feel free.
Yeah. Anything to add at this point? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of double counting, you know, I think we hear you. It's something to consider. But you know, resources can contribute to resource adequacy, CETA, non-energy benefits, flexibility benefits. You know, a lot of those things already overlap within the Aurora model. So since we've got a separate equity analysis, we thought it valuable to at least consider them. But if we feel like double counting may be a potential concern in the transparency, validity of this assessment, happy to continue to talk about it. Love to hear, you know, if you want to take this list back and provide some thoughts, like this might be a double count for this reason. I'd love to see that in the feedback report, or we can have a conversation, time depending. But yeah, I think that's where we're sitting for right now.
Thanks, Tyler. And kind of the second bucket, Joel, you were asking about, are all things equal, you know, in terms of physical structures? And is the 0 and 1 a little too coarse for that? Tyler, any thoughts or reactions to that one?
Yeah, I think at this juncture, all I can do is reiterate that, you know, 0-1 is simple, transparent. It may not provide the quantization that, you know, a nuclear facility certainly has higher decommissioning impacts than something else. And, you know, something we can consider. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not sure I've got anything more to add at this moment.
Yeah. Joel, perhaps if now we're in the feedback report, if you see in other utilities have something more granular than a 0 and 1 for generic resources, perhaps just add that to a feedback report or an email or a link if you have it now. Joel, let's come back to you. I want to bounce between people a little bit. We'll come back to your other groups of questions. Let's go to Jim for a moment, though.
Thanks. Yeah, mine is quick, and don't mean to interrupt your flow, Joel. Really appreciate you teeing up the discussion. My just brief comment, I think, relates to the two first items you flagged, actually. So the first on double counting, I guess it's a variation of Joel's point. It seems like there's some potential for double counting sort of within the metrics and criteria that you've laid out here. So, you know, just like as an example, metric 3 and metric 6, you know, I understand those are customer benefit indicators that, you know, are sort of related to one another, and there's nothing wrong with having sort of related indicators. But I think when they're parsed at that very coarse kind of binary level, I think you can end up in a situation where perhaps you're picking up many of the same attributes by scoring something as a 1 in those two, and not maybe capturing some of the nuance that might sort of be intended in breaking those out as separate indicators. And so that's, you know, I understand you're kind of, you got to start somewhere and you're sort of working through the process, but I think perhaps it might be worth bearing in mind kind of the combination of that coarse grain approach with the potential overlap between different categories. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
Jim, yeah. Response from you, Tyler?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a really well taken point. There's certainly indicators that are related on this list. And And we wanted to start with all of those metrics that we were seeing in our literature reviews and try to encompass as many of our customer benefit indicators as possible. It's really, this is a starting point. So if there's specific metrics that you feel are closely related and may be able to be scored as a single line on this chart, we'd be happy to hear that information in a feedback report or, in dialogue. We've already highlighted the relation between 3 and 6, but if there's others, happy to hear that, and we can definitely consider consolidating those metrics together into a single score.
Thanks, Tyler. Before returning to Joel, I've been hearing kind of themes around the kind of coarse nature of 0 and 1, understanding that PSE, this is just kind of a transparency and something that's possible at a generic scale. And I'm hearing some thoughts of, is there double counting between other aspects of the modeling program, or maybe double counting within this itself? Wanting just to give other RPAG members, I'm seeing Troy and Megan and Ezra and Katie and Stefan. If anyone else has thoughts on kind of those two themes that have emerged, we'd love to hear from you as well. No pressure. Okay, Ezra. Yeah, I opened the door.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is a tough problem, and that's why I haven't really been chiming in, because it's very easy to pick at it and very difficult to come up with a good solution. But I mean, there's no question that just adding up zeros and ones for all these impacts, which is, I know you guys thought a lot about what's the set of impacts, but it's still, it's going to be kind of an arbitrary list. And I think Jim raised that some of these things might be double counted internally. Obviously, some of them are covered in other parts of the analysis. It's going to come up with a very muddled picture, or a picture that in many ways reflects what happened in the room when you were sitting there deciding which of these things are we going to look at and which are we not. And we're not going to weigh them. I mean, the point that a nuclear plant decommissioning is very different from solar or wind decommissioning, like obviously that is, almost goes without saying. So I guess I would say it's just very important to keep that in mind as you move forward, that the result here is going to be indicative, somewhat illuminating, but very, very affected by those decisions. I mean, unweighted is weighting. Okay? That is something that people kind of forget, that like, if you just count everything as 1, that's a weighting. And in general, it's a wrong weighting. And so you do it, and you just have to keep track of the fact that we are not giving the whole picture here. And I have no doubt that down the road, there will be a more detailed look at the specific impacts. But again, I mean, these are generic resources. There are no specific impacts. So I appreciate all the work you're doing. This isn't a criticism, but I do think it's very important to carry that all forward throughout the process. And remember, this score is only an indicative first step.
Thanks, Ezra. Noting that we have about 20 more minutes here. Joel, did you want to wrap with any of your other questions on this slide?
I saw Kate came on camera, and I don't want to monopolize the the conversation here. So if she has something to add, feel free.
No, I'm just coming back. I had to leave for another meeting. So hi, I'm back. Thanks for paying attention to it, Joel.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot there. Sorry.
No, it's great to see you back. Yeah. Another question from you, Joel.
Sure. I mean, I like Ezra's point, I think is well taken, that, it's easy to pick something apart. It's harder to build something. So appreciate that being part of this conversation. And maybe in that spirit, one of the, I couldn't help going through this thinking about what PSE has done in their conservation potential assessment in some cases. I think in the last one, there was some differentiation between different conservation measures in the CPA and the way they're valued that included sort of a bonus for measures that were installed in named communities that might help inform some of this. I also think the conservation potential assessment is a good place to look for use of non-energy impacts, which sort of, I mean, for a lot of these metrics, that's maybe an uncomfortable place to go, assigning a dollar value to it, but that is a way to get these metrics to speak the language that Aurora can use to really optimize these, as opposed to sort of doing this back-end analysis. So I just wanted to bring those up as areas where PSE is addressing some of these problems on the conservation side, where there might be insights into how it could potentially be done, again, in a way that Aurora would understand on the planning side too.
Tyler, any responses before you move along?
No, thanks for the feedback, Joel, and to both Joel and Ezra. Like, thank you guys for providing feedback. Like, we opened up the floor. You know, we'd love for you guys to pick this apart and give your thoughts. And yeah, we've made an offering. Please let us know how we can improve it. You know, this is supposed to be an evolution. You know, we've made some changes from our last planning cycle. I'm certain that we'll make some changes into the next, and hopefully we'll arrive at something that we can make meaningful decisions with.
Yeah. I do want to call on Megan just to make sure we hear from her before we move along. Megan, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks, Tyler. I was just curious about the next steps in the process. I know you mentioned that this is kind of the first step of weighting everything as a 0 or a 1, and that dependent on feedback that might change. Could you just clarify what that next step is in the process? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. So I think as part of any of our public feedback cycles, you know, this is the first step, gathering all this information. We'll take it back, digest it, see what we can implement, when we can make those implementations possible, whether it's the 25 IRP or ISP in 2027. And we'll let you know what we've changed. And if we, you know, definitely in a feedback report or consultation update, or in future communications, we'll let you know. I don't think we have a specific timeline in mind for this. This was a big feedback cycle starting way back the beginning of May with some EAG presentations. So we've got a lot to sit on and digest over the next couple of months.
Thanks.
Thanks for the process question, Megan. Tyler, I'm going to encourage you to keep going so we can get to the gas side.
Yeah, I think I've got a good bit. So
yeah.
All right, next slide, please. Maybe I'll just flash this up for a brief moment. So based on those criteria that I shared on the previous slide, these are all, you know, kind of broad categories of the generic resources from my 2023 electric progress report. And we applied those scores as if those criteria were set up for those. So we've taken some old data and applied that new scoring criteria. And these are the relative scores for all of the different generic resources. So I just wanted to provide some context on how those scores impact the generic resources. You can see demand response, energy efficiency, DER resources, storage and solar score quite high, emitting resources, nuclear, offshore wind score lower, and those utility scale wind solar resources and storage are somewhere in the middle. Give you a broad perspective on how those scoring criteria impact each of the generic resources. I think we can move on. All right, so I promised some results. So all of these changes, we wanted to show how that would change our analysis. So in the next few slides, I'm going to present kind of our, when we go and review those results, I've mentioned that we put equity on an x-axis and then portfolio cost on a y-axis, and we want to try to observe where portfolios fall relative to one another. And based on the compositions of those portfolios, we can get an understanding about which resources are important, what resource mixes are important, and be able to select portfolios that enable more equitable outcomes at a reasonable cost. So this slide and the next couple will have the 23 electric progress report results on the left. And these are lifted directly from the progress report with the methodology that was used in the progress report. And then the 25 IRP on the right is using all of the data, the portfolios from that 23 electric progress report, but updated the portfolio benefit analysis with the new methodology that we've been discussing today. So using those ones and zeros for the generic resources, normalization for the portfolio cost, and absolute scores as opposed to relative scores. So this is a lot to look at. So let's move to the next slide and we'll look at a few specific portfolios so you can get a sense for what's changing. All right, so I've circled 1, which is our reference portfolio. This is the least cost portfolio. So we provide Aurora with our sparsest set of constraints. So we haven't done any tinkering to the model. We let Aurora solve the least cost solution for us, and that dictates our reference portfolio. It tends to be the least cost, should be the least cost. And in the previous methodology, I'd like to highlight that it also set the reference for our relative scoring. So you'll see it lands right on 0 on the x-axis. So it's got an equity score of 0, and all the portfolios are relative to that reference portfolio. In the new scoring methodology, in the 25 approach on the right, you'll see that that 1 is still like in the middle of the group, but it now is off of that 0 line and has a score of its own. So all of the portfolios will score their own unique absolute score based on this new generic resource 1-0 binary scoring.
Tyler, just a clarifying question. Ezra thinks that the most desirable would be lower left. Did I get your question right? Versus lower right? Tyler, can you just justify the lower right being the desirable?
Yeah, so if we've provided a score, either 1 or 0, 1 if it provides a benefit. So the more 1s that portfolio has based on the resource mix, the higher the equity score will be. So we want the equity score to move right with increasing values. And portfolio cost, generally lower is better. So we want the portfolio cost to be lower. So that's toward the bottom of the plot. So our most desirable portfolios will land in the lower right-hand corner.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All good.
It's impacts versus benefits is confusing.
Yes.
So thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
You bet.
Thanks. All right, Tyler, please continue.
Great. And then one other note that I wanted to highlight while we're looking at the reference portfolio. I mentioned that we're using a normalized portfolio cost. So you can see I've got in the right-hand plot, dollars per megawatt. So that's dollars per peak megawatt. And the cost is quite a bit lower than on the plot on the left. We're looking at $20 to $26 billion. And here we're looking at $2.5 to $3.2 million dollars per megawatt. So that's a change, but I think the relative information on the locations of those the portfolios is the most important bit of information. And if you look really closely, you'll see that since all of the portfolios listed in this 23 progress report had the same peak capacity need in 2045, all the relative positions on the y-axis, so the vertical axis, will be the same, transposed from the plot on the left. They may have moved left and right along the x-axis, but you get the same general information, but using this normalized methodology allows us to add an electrification portfolio that may need to add a lot more resources and will therefore have it has a lot higher peak need. So it adds a lot more resources and it'll come at a lot higher cost, but we can still get at the same equity benefit and it'll be in the same context as all the other portfolios.
I think, Tyler, we're gonna keep us moving, so I want to make sure you have time to talk about the maximum customer benefit. So keep.
All right. Let's move on to the next slide then. Here I wanted to highlight our preferred portfolio, and I'll keep my comments brief on this one. I think the key takeaway here is that it's in about the same position it was last time. You know, it's at somewhat of an increased cost to the reference portfolio, but still provides a lot of equity enabling benefits. It's still far out to the right. We have to spend a little more to get out there. But we think that even under this new methodology, the preferred portfolio from the 23 progress report still confers a lot of equity enabling benefits. So there is some consistency, or a good deal of consistency between the old methodology and the new methodology. And can we move on to the next slide, please? And then the last one I wanted to talk about was portfolio 4 as just an example of a portfolio that moved a lot. So in the 23 progress report, you could see portfolio 4 is right around the reference portfolio. So, you know, pretty average in its equity enabling benefits, but it moved way out to the right using this new scoring methodology. And portfolio 4, for those of you who don't remember all the way back to the 23 progress report, was one of our experimental portfolios where we added in additional distributed solar resources above the economic suggestion from Aurora. So that increased the amount of distributed solar in the portfolio, and that was the only change we made. Everything else was optimized around that kind of forced in decision. And some of the drivers that moved that to the right are as a result of some of the new metrics that we started looking at with this expanded list of metrics that it also scored high in because we added those distributed resources, namely the local energy and community safety and community health, in addition to those customer participation metrics of distributed energy resources.
Megan, please.
Yeah, and maybe this will be answered later, or there's a better time to ask this question. But as you've been talking about these different benefits, I have been curious about the definitions. For instance, how are you defining community health? Is that something that the RPAG has the ability to weigh in on or see that definition? I would be really curious to learn more about that. And again, if there's a better time to answer this, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't think I've got a great answer for you right off the bat, Megan. So maybe we could follow up in the feedback report. And I think we're definitely looking for feedback. So if you've got some insights on a few specific metrics that you'd like to provide definitions for, we'd love to hear that information.
Thanks, Megan.
Thanks.
All right, Tyler. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so I think we'll move on to if there's no more questions, let's move on to the conversation questions. And I think you've all been busy on the mural, so.
Well, quiet on the mural, but very talkative. And I think you all asked a lot of questions before you saw it mapped on. And so if I'm going to be mean and strict here, let's move to the maximum customer benefit. And if there was something else you wanted to talk about with the portfolio benefit analysis, I request that you use the feedback report. So we have a few minutes for live discussion here. If you're loving the sticky note world, this is now the yellow section on maximum customer benefit. And so you can provide some reactions there. So carry us forward, Tyler.
Great. I'll try to be breezy. I covered this exact set of slides in our public participation. So if you feel like I'm a little too light, there's some good conversation there as well. But let's dive right in. Next slide, please. All right, so the regulatory framework for what the maximum customer benefit sensitivity is, it's set out in the WAC that we must run at least one sensitivity in our IRP that looks at maximum customer benefit. And then those benefits are defined in the RCW, which I've highlighted in orange here. So we're trying to measure the equitable transition to clean energy through the distribution of energy and non-energy benefits, reduction of burdens to vulnerable populations and highly impacted communities, long-term and short-term public health and environmental benefits, and reduction of costs and risks, and energy security and resiliency. So that's the framework if you're interested in diving deep into what set off the need for this conversation. Next slide, please. All right, so when we started thinking about what a maximum customer benefit sensitivity would look like, we started with the categories that were listed in the RCW. So I tried to extract some of the key phrases from that orange box, including energy benefits, non-energy benefits, public health, environmental benefits, cost and risk reduction, and energy security and resiliency. So with those categories in mind, that those were the things that we needed to maximize, I looked at the list of metrics that we've just been pouring over and tried to figure out which metrics spoke to those specific categories. So I don't know that I need to read all of these. These are largely in line with the metrics that we've been discussing already, but this is not an all-encompassing list. Some of the metrics were left off because they don't really align with some of these categories that were specifically listed in the maximum customer benefit regulation. So after we took a look at the metrics, we're like, which kinds of resources provide value to those metrics? And after thinking about all those resources, we found that 3 resource types exhibited a lot of these characteristics, provided these types of benefits, those being conservation, demand response, and distributed solar and storage. So I've gone through and added a little icon for each along each metric where we believe those resource types contribute or provide that kind of benefit. And you can see using these 3 resource types, we can cover all of these benefits, all these metrics with a benefit. And this is not to say that utility scale resources don't provide these benefits or storage resources don't provide these benefits, but we felt like these, after looking at all of them, are representative of 3 resource types that provide the most benefits for these specific metrics. So next slide, please. So that leads us to our recommended sensitivity. And we're suggesting that we maximize the distributed energy resources, demand response, and conservation in the portfolio. And then we can use our portfolio benefit assessment tool to see how well that portfolio scores. And how we landed on maximizing distributed energy resources, demand response, and conservation is, we've reviewed customer surveys that suggest interest in local distributed resources. Our portfolio benefit analysis tool has scored those resources high. We feel like they tick a lot of the boxes in terms of the specific categories, benefit categories listed in the RCW. So we wanted to present this as our maximum customer benefit sensitivity. And speaking to what specifically is maximized, what does maximize mean? In terms of distributed energy resources, we're in the process of running the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's Distributed Generation Market Demand Model, the DGEN model. And that will give us a list of the available generic resources, the technical, economic, and market potential for those types of resources in the Puget Sound area. And we're going to maximize that economic potential. In terms of demand response, we're going to select all the demand response programs identified in the CPA. And similarly for conservation, we're going to select the highest conservation bundle from the 25 IRP CPA. And I think my next slide is just the discussion questions. So
Perfect. just where we want to be. So if folks, if you're not eating a giant Philly cheesesteak, if you wouldn't mind coming on camera for these last few minutes of conversation here, we're talking about the maximum customer benefit. Feedback for PSE about what do you think about this approach? And if there was something you wanted to talk about the portfolio benefits analysis, I'm sure you can squeeze that in. So feedback for PSE to consider.
Well, I'll jump in since you can always count on me. I think it, it looks interesting. It's an end member. It's an extreme case. I think that it risks, when you push it as far as you can in each of those, you might lose some of the economic benefits you get from optimizing the economic level of those resources. But I think that you'll learn a lot, and how much it costs will also be very illuminating. So I think it makes sense to run that case. And as I always say, just remember what you're modeling when you interpret the results.
Thanks, Ezra. I think you hit the nail on the head. It is an extreme case, and we've kind of thrown cost out the window. So hopefully we'll learn a lot about what makes, how to maximize these benefits and what impacts that has on the rest of the portfolio.
Thank you, Ezra, for chiming in. Anybody else here? Looking at the mural board, not seeing a lot of thoughts or questions there.
Quick question. Sorry, I'm hopping right in.
Good.
Tyler, could you just explain a little bit more what you said about throwing cost out the window, considering reduced energy cost burden is one of the key maximum customer benefit sensitivities?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Kate. It's one of several of those metrics that were listed as a maximization criteria. Something to consider, we do have a reference portfolio, which is the least cost portfolio according to our capacity expansion modeling. So we'll have that as another bookend as the lowest cost solution. And we can definitely look at these two together and make some assumptions and some learnings onto which types of resources contribute to those different cases. Neither of these is likely to become the preferred portfolio, which is our ultimate resource selection. It's all about learning from these different sensitivity cases.
Thanks. Hey. Well, if anything comes up, you know how to reach the feedback report. We're running a little bit over on the gas side, so I think maybe we'll switch in that direction. Tyler, thank you for these back-to-back presentations. Thank you, RPAG members, for all of the excellent questions. I can't look at all the PSE staff, but I can tell they're lighting up. This is what they really wanted to get out of this conversation.
Yeah, great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, great discussion, everyone. So we can go to the next slide, and let's bring Hannah on up. All right, and again, if you want to have fun with the mural board, we're in the orange section.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Wall, and I'm an analyst in the resource planning group at PSE. Today, I'll be presenting on our equity approach in the 2025 gas IRP. We're looking for feedback on our approach because this is the first time we're incorporating equity in the gas IRP. Just kind of throwing back to Brian's section, we have presented this approach in the public webinar on the 6th, and we're going to present this approach again in the June 18th EAG meeting, looking for additional feedback. But the specific questions we're kind of asking is, does this represent a reasonable step forward in our efforts to better integrate equity in our planning? And if there are any other steps you'd like to see us take in the future, we just ask that you keep this in mind. And if we have time, I'll revisit them at the end of the presentation. We can go to the next slide. All right, just want to give a brief overview of the scope of the IRP. The gas IRP is a planning document that evaluates the least cost approach for delivering gas and meeting our customer use needs. The IRP performs an analysis of regional pipelines and availability of fuels. The pipelines evaluated here are not PSE owned, rather we have a contract with these regional pipelines to supply into the PSE city gate. Anything that is considered downstream of the city gate is included in the delivery system planning analysis, which occurs in a separate part at PSE. But in terms of equity, we are working closely together with that group to align as a company. But just for this presentation, I'll be covering the midstream gas IRP scope. DSB did give a public webinar on equity in the delivery system, and there's a link there. Maybe we can attach that in the chat if you're interested in more information. You can go to the next slide. Awesome. Okay. So as I said, the gas IRP is looking at ways to meet our customers' needs while we're also incorporating cost-effective decarbonization. I'm going to go through kind of the 4 levers that are evaluated within the gas IRP. The first resource type we consider is energy efficiency, which are programs that reduce customer usage by energy efficient appliances and home upgrades. We evaluate volume of conservation, and that framework allows us to evaluate an equity potential, while the actual equity application is developed within the energy efficiency team program process. So for example, we identify the volume of energy efficiency in our model at the system level, whereas the energy efficiency team is looking at how much should be applied to low-income community customers and other real-life applications. The second resource type is targeted electrification. This is specifically targeted programs occurring through our customer programs. Currently, we have a low-income focused electrification pilot going on, and PSE plans to take lessons learned from these programs and incorporate broader equity considerations if we're able to expand these programs in the future. I will say that for both energy efficiency and targeted electrification programs, the IRP takes cost-effective fixed volumes. That's what we drop in the model. They're fixed volumes selected each year. The third bucket evaluated is alternative fuels. These are cleaner fuel alternatives to natural gas that may use existing infrastructure. In the IRP, we evaluate renewable natural gas and green hydrogen. And the last resource type we're going to evaluate is natural gas. We assess current and potential future pipeline contracts to meet customer demand. We can move forward. The next slide. Thank you. Okay, so this slide is meant to showcase how we include equity in our decision framework when we're evaluating candidate portfolios. We include laws and codes and standards, cost impacts, and gas decarbonization in our base capacity expansion model. In order to include equity in our analysis, we run each portfolio through our gas equity scorecard analysis, which is an outside the model process, and we assign each portfolio a score. This equity score, with the addition of the other gas IRP considerations, helps us to make an informed decision when we're selecting a preferred portfolio. We can move forward. Next slide. Cool. Okay. So the gas equity scorecard assessment will help us predict how well a certain portfolio will enable distributions of burdens and benefits. We are using the same methodology. So to answer your question, yes, we are using the same methodology as the electric portfolio benefit analysis, with the difference being the customer benefit indicators that we're evaluating and the bucket of resources that we're evaluating. We have also aligned to a similar scorecard method as delivery system planning in order to ensure that all the planning groups have similar equity assessment measurements and evaluation. This proposed method is trackable across future IRPs, as each portfolio will receive an equity score, and each IRP we will be able to see how the score changes over the course of time. I'm going to go through the 4 steps again, but I'm going to keep it brief. It's the same methodology, really. So step 1 is resource scoring. Here we have a resource-specific scorecard, and that's the foundation of this tool. Each resource assessed in the IRP capacity expansion model will have a unique scorecard describing its ability to contribute to more equitable outcomes. The resources included are the ones I've listed above. So we have energy efficiency, targeted electrification, natural gas, and alternative fuels are going to be broken out into their individual parts. So renewable natural gas and green hydrogen for a total of 5 resource types evaluated. Scorecards for these resources are going to be developed before portfolio development begins, and we're presenting them here in a few moments. And as Tyler went into great detail, the resources are scored on a binary. So either the resource will contribute positively to a given criteria and assigned a score of 1, or it will not contribute and or contributes negatively, which will be assigned a score of 0. So I think the key there is that we're scoring directionally rather than with magnitude. The scoring criteria we're using is actually made up of customer benefit indicators. I will discuss those in great detail in the next slide. And while each resource receives a specific scorecard, the gas equity scorecard analysis aims to measure the holistic impacts of a given mix of resources. And so the resource scores are going to be aggregated and applied to the portfolio level. I'm going to now move to step 2, where we're extracting portfolio results from Plexos. Plexos is the capacity expansion model we're using on the gas IRP. This informs the composition of each portfolio and quantity of each resource in metric tons per year. Moving to step 3, this involves taking the resource stack in terms of metric tons associated with each of the resources that sum up to the gross demand. So that resource stack up to the gross demand. And then those resources are normalized to 100%, so we can get a percent composition of the portfolio. The normalization tactic allows for a comparison of portfolios across timescales, demand conditions, and other factors between portfolios that make it difficult to compare them directly. That portfolio composition is then multiplied by the equity score from the customer benefit indicators for each of those resources to obtain one portfolio equity score. At this time, as Tyler mentioned earlier, each metric is weighted equally, but it's possible that the metrics can be weighted differently based on feedback. Finally, I'm moving to step 4, where we're going to include the total portfolio cost in our analysis. We normalize the total portfolio cost to the gross demand of the portfolio so we can compare across different conditions. And then at this point in the process, we're going to take a view that looks at the normalized cost against the portfolio equity score. And the portfolios with the lowest cost and highest equity scores are considered the most desirable portfolios. It's a lot of information, but I think I mostly just recapped what Tyler said there. I can move to the next slide. Okay. So per the Clean Energy Transformation Act, the electric IRP adopted the CBIs as an approach to ensuring equity is taken into consideration. They included their first equity analysis in the 2023 Electric Progress Report, whereas the 2023 gas IRP did not include an electric analysis. And so therefore, this is our first look at incorporating equity in the gas IRP. We're following their steps, but we're slightly behind their process, as the primary difference is we do not include a generic resource assessment to assess the burdens and benefits. The 2025 gas IRP will be incorporating some CBI categories, excluding those metrics that we feel are electric specific. I'm now going to walk through each of these categories and how we're scoring. So CBI 1 evaluates participation in clean energy programs. We will be targeting energy efficiency, targeted electrification, and renewable natural gas programs. CBI 2 evaluates increases in clean energy jobs, and we will be targeting energy efficiency, targeted electrification, and clean energy fuels, so both renewable natural gas and green hydrogen. CBI 3 evaluates home comfort. This CBI will target energy efficiency and targeted electrification programs. CBI 4 evaluates a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The resources scoring in this CBI are any resource that has a net zero contribution to greenhouse gas emissions as measured by the Climate Commitment Act. And so those resources are energy efficiency, targeted electrification, renewable natural gas, and green hydrogen. CBI 5 is measured by a decrease in frequency and duration of outages. Here we are evaluating total system reliability. And so any resource that contributes to system reliability will get a score of 1. Specifically, these resources are natural gas, renewable natural gas, green hydrogen, and energy efficiency. We decided to score the CBI in this way because we're looking at the total reliability of the overall gas system. The gas system is built for more resilience for major events such as very cold days, and therefore any resource that is within the gas system will receive a positive score. And the last CBI we're looking at evaluates improved access to clean and reliable energy, and therefore we're targeting clean alternative fuels, assuming a perfect future technology capability for both green hydrogen and renewable natural gas. I think I'll move to the next slide and then pause for any questions. Okay, so this slide just reiterates what I just walked through on the previous slide, which is how we're scoring each of these individual resources. I can give you a second to look at it. And then the graph on the right shows the total resource scores across all the CBIs. So at this point, RNG and energy efficiency are scoring the highest at a score of 5, and natural gas is scoring the lowest at the score of 1. For the next couple slides, I'll be walking through some results. So are there any questions about methodology?
Yes, Jim, please.
Thanks, Hannah. So I guess similar to the point I made on the electric side, I think there's some overlap between some of these categories. And I think it, for me, presents more of a double counting concern here than on the electric side. I think that might be because some of these metrics maybe sort of started as electric metrics and got adapted a little bit. You know, in particular, I think like the last one on your list, improved access to clean, reliable energy, that seems to really just capture things that are already captured by metrics further up, like the reliability one, which I confess you're going kind of fast there. I'm not sure the extent to which that's focused on gas system versus electric system reliability and why targeted electrification lands where it does. But setting that aside, I wanted to add just a couple other points of feedback. Outdoor air quality is a factor on the electric side, and I think it makes imminent sense for it also to be a factor on the gas side. And I think under that, you know, you would see conservation and electrification as being the ones that capture that benefit, particularly at the low resolution of zeros and ones. It seems very easy to reflect that. And I think that some of the metrics used to capture some of the indicators, so, you know, improved home comfort kind of as maybe being one, don't fully seem to kind of track from the, you know, original category through the indicator and metric in a way that totally makes sense to me. So I wanted to flag that. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. Appreciate it.
Anyone else have questions about methodology? Okay, carry on, Hannah.
Awesome. Right, so you can go to the next slide. Okay, so here we have taken each portfolio from the 2023 gas IRP and gone through the 4 steps of the gas equity scorecard assessment. The scores here on the bottom left are the average portfolio equity score. The portfolios scoring the highest are the electrification scenarios. The graph to the right shows the preferred portfolio and the electrification portfolio average equity score broken down by the contributing CBIs. So I just want to walk through how all these CBIs are contributing to that scoring. The CBI that contributes the heaviest to the preferred portfolio is CBI 5, that's resilience. This is because the resources that get a score of 1 for the CBI are energy efficiency, alternative fuels, and natural gas. And together, these resources make up 100% of the composition of this portfolio, and therefore getting an average score of 1 for the CBI. And that's really driving that score of that portfolio. On the other hand, the electrification portfolio gets a higher score for CBI 1 through 4. These CBIs all score positively for electrification, targeted electrification, which makes up 66% of the electrification portfolio. This would drive the portfolio score higher for each of these CBIs, which drives the average equity score higher for the electrification portfolio. While this is a really helpful view to see how each resource impacts the CBIs and therefore impacts the portfolio average score, it does not take cost of portfolio into account. So the next slide will show a plot that compares normalized portfolio costs against the average CBI score for each portfolio.
Hannah, before you move on, yeah, please, Megan, weigh in.
Hi, and thank you for the presentation so far, Hannah. I had a question. Actually, on the previous slide, I was surprised to see that targeted electrification was not included in the improved access to clean, reliable energy, just given that most of our electric grid is clean energy. And so I would think that a targeted electrification program would improve that access to clean energy. Could you explain why that is not included as a criteria score 1 under the 6th indicator? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that also ties into our decision to not score targeted electrification in CBI 5, which is the resilience one. The reason we decided to exclude targeted electrification, even though it is clean, is because the gas system is designed for a higher standard of reliability at 2% LOLP as opposed to 5% LOP for the electric grid. And so we felt that we should leave out the electrification as we're just transferring the load to a quote unquote less reliable system, since this is the gas perspective. So that's kind of the reasoning why we decided to leave that one out. However, I will say these are all not set in stone. We're not concrete on these. So, you know, we're happy to take feedback on if you think that should change. We're happy to listen and your reasoning.
Thanks for the question, Megan, and thanks for the response, Hannah. How about you go to the next slide, Hannah?
Oh, slide after that. Yeah. Okay. So this plot helps gives perspective on which portfolios are cost effective while also having higher equity scores. Leveraging this angle, we could see what the equity analysis could look like for future planning cycles. Ideally, the lower right quadrant is where we want to see our portfolios land. As we can see, the electrification scenarios all are in the upper right quadrant, which is high equity score at high cost. So I'll let you simmer on this, and then we can move to the next slide.
Great. So here's our discussion. We're gonna unfortunately truncate it a little bit. Just reading in the chat here, Jim's saying that Megan's good point aligns with his question earlier. It seems targeted electrification was ruled out of indicators 5 and 6 for the same reason, which seems like a double counting issue. But Joel, I saw your hand earlier. Any thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I was just typing it in the chat, but I can verbalize it too. I had a similar question to what Megan brought up just a moment ago with target electrification having a 0 and the improved access to clean, reliable energy. And it seems like, if I'm understanding right, the response is that you're leaning into the reliable part of that indicator as opposed to the clean energy part of that. And the resource adequacy requirement is more stringent on the gas side than the electric. And I note that Jim's, I think, response in the chat is that might be another double counting issue with the decreased frequency and duration of outages, which would tend to cover reliability also.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, Hannah, any responses from Hannah's colleagues here?
No, I think these are all really good points, and we'll definitely take this back internally and think about some of this double counting.
Yeah, very good. Well, I want to respect the members of the public who have been waiting to give their public comment, that we give them their time. So just any last thoughts or pieces of feedback for PSE at this moment? Troy, please.
Just on the previous slide, when you're comparing this normalized cost, this is normalized per metric ton of gas in the system, or like gas capacity. In the electricity, it was about peak capacity. How about what is the normalization against in the gas scenario or in the gas model?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
No, you're good. We're looking at the metric ton up to the gross demand. So we're normalizing against the gross demand.
All right, thanks for the question, Troy. Does that help?
Yeah, so if in an efficiency or an electrification scenario, both have reduced demand, you're still dividing by a smaller, in both of them, you're dividing by a smaller gross demand. Or are you converting the demand from gas to electric and still counting it?
We're just comparing to the gross demand of gas.
Okay.
Very good. All right. Well, I'm going to slowly transition us. So thank you so much, Hannah. I'm noticing that some of you are having kind of, after marinating on the maximum customer benefit piece that Tyler shared, that there were some questions and comments in the mural board. PSE will address those in the feedback report because we don't have time to come back to them. But thank you for weighing in there. Yeah, and thank you, Hannah, for touching on all things gas and equity. So Will, take us to our next slide. Keep on going. Okay, so the feedback form closes on June 19th. So some of you had specific thoughts, whether it was around definitions or community health or weighting and anything like that, please, in writing by the 19th. July 17th is your next meeting. So after a lot of tight back-to-back RPAG meetings every couple of weeks, you get to exhale for a month. And on that note, I just really wanted to thank all the RPAG members who have been in kind of these long and tightly spaced meetings. I just know how much PSE values your input. So thank you for those. You can go to the next slide, please. Beautiful. That takes us to our public comment, just pretty much on time. Emily, if you can enable the hand raising feature, that will allow us to hear from members of the public. And I will share my timer screen. Okay, we have a hand from Don Marsh. Let me just get all my pieces here set up. Very good. Okay, Don, can we hear you?
I hope so.
We sure can. All right, please, your time starts now.
Okay, Don Marsh from the Washington Clean Energy Coalition. Many good aspirations were expressed in the presentation today, and we appreciate some of the improvements over the 2023 Electric Progress Report. I'm personally interested in the maximum customer benefit sensitivity. In general, we would like to believe that PSE is sincere in its desire to promote equity and fully engage its customers in the clean energy transition. However, PSE's credibility is severely diminished by its obvious attempt to limit public participation in the IRP process. There are many people who would like to engage with the company, but we are not allowed to participate in the discussion or ask questions during these RPAG meetings. We can't see the RPAG chat, we can't see the mural board that was used today, and our comments are limited to 2 minutes after a 3-hour meeting. This prevents us from engaging with PSE and RPAG members. This curtailment of public participation in detailed IRP planning will produce a less equitable, less customer-focused plan. It's certainly not what legislators envisioned when they determined that public participation is an essential part of the IRP process. My organization will make suggestions for improvement of public participation in the ISP docket, and I hope PSE and the UTC will take our feedback seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Don. Appreciate those thoughts. Make sure I'm going to the right screen here. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, Don, just I know typically we don't respond. I am going to share the link to this board, the mural board, now that it's has all the comments from the members. So Emily, if you could just share the link again in the chat that shows what the member said, so members of the public can see at least those components. Looking around the room, let me check my participant list. I'm not seeing any other hands. Emily, are you seeing any other hands?
I'm not. And just to confirm, you want me to put the mural board link into the chat for everyone?
Yes, please.
Got it.
Yep, they'll be able to view it now. Okay. Well, with that, we have just a few more moments. I just want to thank everyone so much for joining today. Really, really good conversations from RPAG members. PSE, do you want to close us out with just a final word?
Philip, you want to say anything? Would you like me to?
Well, I just like to thank you all. Thank you all for joining us. And I don't recall if no, that's okay. I was going to say we got that all covered. So thank you all very much for joining us. This was a great conversation. This how to incorporate equity, and our continual process of improving that is it just really is ongoing. So really, really appreciate all the feedback. Thank you.
Great. Well, I hope everyone enjoys the next month of nice warm weather, and we'll see everyone in July. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sophie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sophie.